This is the third and final video talking about the vertebrate integument. In this video, I'd like to focus on the glands associated with vertebrate skin. A couple of quick definitions. So in general, all glands are made of epithelia, and we split glands into two main categories. Exocrine glands, if products leave the body, so things which are coming from cells inside the body and going out onto the skin. Obviously, that's leaving the body, and typically they travel through a tube or a duct. These are known as exocrine glands. So primarily, what I'm talking about in this video are exocrine glands. Their products are leaving the body as they are secreted onto the surface of the skin. And very often they travel through a tube or a duct. The other type of gland is what is known as an endocrine gland. Its products, known as hormones or signaling molecules, which then go into the blood or are signaling, cells to their neighbors. These products are not traveling through a tube or a duct, and they are not leaving the body. Now, the glands, which I'll focus on here primarily, are bigger glands, and they're multicellular. However, it should be noted that it is also possible for a single cell to then produce secretions which leave the body. So there's a type of cell known as a goblet cell, which secretes mucus. It is a one-celled structure. So just pointing that out. As I start off with fish, that a gland doesn't have to be a complex structure with a duct. It can be an exocrine gland if it's just this vase-shaped goblet cell. And here, obviously, I'm talking about the integument today, but here you can see in the large intestine all of the goblet cells secreting mucus. One other quick definition is as we look at how actually material is secreted. So, materials are being produced which are leaving the body, but how is that done? And it turns out that varies. There are different kinds of ways that cells can release secretions. And so as you can see here, there can be, there can be little vesicles produced, which then undergo exocytosis. And so, a vesicle perhaps maturing in the Golgi is then sent to the cell membrane. It fuses, releasing a product. That is what is known as a merocrine gland. You can have a cell which then divides off as pieces of cytoplasm, making fragments of itself. This is known as an apocrine gland, or what's known as a holocrine gland. The cell may produce a bunch of contents and then die. And then the entire cell and the remains of its contents then become the secretion that is known as a holocrine gland. And so there are variations in the way that secretions can be made. Okay. Going back then to the beginning, the ancestors of fish, as far as we can tell, didn't really have much in the way of glands in their integument. So when we look at the primitive chordates alive today, we really don't see much in the way of glands. The epithelia here is simple. It was in the first fish, however, that we see a number of traits being shared, including exocrine glands. And so the ancestors of the first vertebrates had glands, and the hagfish is well known for the slime that it can be released from its body. So fish, beginning with the first fish, have glands associated with their skin. Here's the other jawless fish, the lamprey. Now, although fish skin often has glands, these glands often tend to be simple in a structure, often unicellular. So you can see them in the background here. They often make a mucus. They can make oils. So these could serve a couple of functions, certainly decreasing friction in the water, which would then make fish more efficient swimmers. But then also the potential of being antibacterial and antimicrobial and help preventing from infections. And so there are glands in the integument of fish, but they tend to be simple glands. If we were then to jump to amphibians, amphibians have more complex glands associated with their integument, as we can see in this frog. In general, a bunch of things. Frogs need to keep their skin moist, all right, because they're breathing through their skin, and thus they need to have the cells be alive and then form an effective way of gas exchange. And so there are cells keeping the skin moist. And then there can also be waxes, which are preventing water loss, and the granular or poison glands I'll get to. Now, as you'll notice around these glands, you can find smooth muscle. So there can be reflexes, which then cause the muscle to constrict to secrete the products out of a duct. All right, so these products are leaving the body, so they would be exocrine glands. And here you can see that there are, tubes or ducts here. So here, note the smooth muscle cells that can surround a gland. The largest glands in the frog skin are what are called poison glands or granular glands. Now notice the cells here are very large. They have a lot of cytoplasm, but the nucleus tends to be around the exterior of the gland, with this cytoplasm moving towards the interior. Sometimes these cells can fuse. Cells sometimes do that and form a fused mass of cells known as a syncytium. The contents of these vary. Some of their contents could be antimicrobial, but one very common thing is that this is a way to deter predation, because the products here could be foul tasting in sufficient quantity. They could even be life-threatening. So in that one that just passed, you'll notice here that here's the gland, but notice here is the duct onto which this could leave the skin. So that is an exocrine gland. And so there can be something which is poisonous in great enough quantities. There could also be enzymes here which could then act on these components so that they would change upon being secreted, and then that could activate certain compounds. But so this could be a deterrent for against predators, these granular or poison glands. And then there are the smaller serous glands, and these are more secreting the mucus, which is keeping the skin moist. So here you can see the serous glands, and once again, these are exocrine glands that empty onto the skin, and the closely so notice that these are obviously secretory cells, because here you can see all of the granules which are making the products which will be secreted. All right, and in addition to serous glands, there are seromucous glands, which are similar, but in addition to having these cuboidal cells, there are then squamous cells underneath that, so they have different cell types. All right, so then just in general, going to amphibians, they produce waxes, they keep the skin moist, they can produce toxins to deter predators. There are more glands in the skin of amphibians than we saw in fish. Reptiles tend to have fewer glands. They don't need to keep their skin moist. And then obviously their scales would be a deterrent for releasing substances onto the surface of their skin. And so fewer integumentary glands in reptiles. Mammals lost the reptilian scales, and as a result, mammal skin far more rich in glands. And so the rest of what I'm going to discuss will be the glands which we find in the integument of mammals. First, I'd like to go through a type of gland called a sebaceous gland. As you can see here, it can empty out onto the skin. This is the epidermis of the skin, and here's a sebaceous gland emptying onto the surface of the skin. But the majority of them are associated with a hair. All right, so if there's a hair shaft, the sebaceous gland can be located next to it. And then when smooth muscle pulls the hair so that it stands on end, that will pump then the products of the sebaceous gland. So here's that hair shaft. Here's the sebaceous gland emptying onto the shaft. And so the erector pili muscles, which cause this hairs to stand on end. There was in this image, that's the hair there, and there was a sebaceous gland around it. Here's a hair shaft, and here's the sebaceous gland around it. It's a branched gland with multiple lobes. Once again, here's the hair shaft. Here's the hair, and here's the sebaceous gland. Now, keratin by itself is, oh, and I'm sorry, sebaceous glands are holocrine glands. And so the cells make a variety of products, and then it is the entire cell as it dies, the entire cell and its contents becomes the sebum, which is released from these sebaceous glands. Keratin by itself is dry and brittle. And so this is, in essence, a conditioner. So if we didn't bathe frequently, our skin and our hair would seem oily. And part of this would be our natural conditioners, including this sebum made from sebaceous glands. Now, we shower and we bathe, obviously, the advantages in that, but this removes this natural conditioner. And so then many people feel that their skin or hair is dry to the point where they have to add conditioner afterwards to replace that which is lost. Now, if we were to go to other species, or even if we were to just look at humans, sebaceous glands can be modified in different parts of the body and then produce, secretions specific to one region of the body, such as earwax made by the ceruminous glands, for example. And if we were to consider species other than humans, obviously that list could become longer. And here you can see those holocrine cells in action. So they move as they mature. They move to a different position in the gland. They then enter this lumen where they become larger as they're making the products which will be released. And then as they burst, then they can be released into this duct and released then as sebum. All right. So they're making oils, free fatty acids, squalene. They're making waxes, and once again, this is good, just kind of as a conditioner for the otherwise brittle keratin, which makes up skin and hair. So that is one of the glands of the mammalian integument. Another one, and this is perhaps what we think of first when we think of sweat glands, are the eccrine or sudoriferous glands, which secrete a watery sweat to help us cool down. And so obviously, as we're exercising, then we're starting to overheat, right? We try to keep a constant temperature. And then if we were overheating, then we secrete this watery sweat. And as then evaporation converts the watery sweat into gaseous water vapor, it removes heat. So the heat which was needed to take that liquid water and turn it into water vapor was heat from inside our overheating body. And now as the water vapor leaves, it is gone. Now, this is something I stress, and it's so important. Most animals don't sweat to cool down. I mean, we take it for granted. When we're hot, we sweat. But look at these dogs. How are they losing heat? Not by sweating. When you touch a dog in summertime, they're not dripping with sweat the way their human walker might be. And instead, they have their mouths open so that they can be losing heat through their mouth. If you ever look at birds on a very hot day, you'll commonly see that. So here's a stork. Look at its mouth. It's open. Why? Because it's losing heat that way. Same with this bird. Most animals don't sweat. In fact, very few animals lose heat by sweating through a significant portion. I mean, I saw once in a zoo that there's a marsupial kangaroo that does it a little bit. Pigs can do it a little bit, but really only 2 animals on Earth do it a lot. Horses, all right, so horses, they will sweat on a hot day, releasing watery sweat as a way of cooling down. And then humans. So humans and horses are the 2 organisms on the planet which lose heat the fastest. There are, like I said, a couple of other animals like pigs. They can sweat a little bit, not to that degree, and they can use eccrine glands to cool down a little bit. But then this is key because that makes us special. All right, we cool down very quickly. Clearly, this was important for ancestral humans. And if you ask why that was, one of the things that I think a lot of people think is that we're slower than other animals because they run on 4 legs. Like a deer can outrun us, or an antelope could outrun us easily. But humans can keep running. All right, so humans can run marathons. I mean, I'm not a great athlete, but I've run a couple of marathons. How many animals run 26 miles at a clip? We do, horses do, and now you're starting to run out of animals capable of doing that. One of the reasons is we can cool down. And ancestrally, it seems that one of the ways that people used to hunt is that they would start chasing 4-footed prey. And you'd think, oh, but the antelope could clearly run away from the humans for a while, but then the humans would catch up, and then the antelope would run away, and then the humans would catch up. But if you're closer to the equator, at a certain point, the antelope might just drop from exhaustion. It was overheating, whereas humans, with this endurance running and the ability to cool off, had a novel style of movement, and this led to their success. And so our eccrine glands, our sudoriferous glands, which allow us to cool down, this is actually, kind of unique in us. I mean, horses have it and some animals have it to, a minor degree. But once again, we shouldn't take it for granted. It's one of the things that made us special and apparently was fairly important in early humans and how they hunted. These glands tend to go deep into the dermis and perhaps even into the hypodermis. And the cells at the bottom are the ones which are producing the watery sweat. And then it passes through this long coiled duct. If you're interested, the walls of these sweat ducts have an unusual type of tissue where they have stratified cuboidal epithelia. That's a minor tissue in humans. We don't see that often, but the lining of these ducts for the eccrine glands, that is a place that you can find it. All right, so that was a second gland, but there are more. One of the things I'd like to kind of take a step back and discuss are the apocrine sweat glands, which then can produce pheromones. All right, so let me just kind of back up and talk about dogs, and we'll get to buffalo in just a second. So 2 dogs meet each other, and what happens? Well, very often then they're smelling each other. And you might ask why? And the answer is because dogs, like all mammals, produce a certain type of sweat which is intended to make body odor on purpose. Bodies don't have to have much of a smell. I mean, watery sweat doesn't smell much, but these pheromones in this body odor are there so that this dog can send signals about itself to that dog. And that dog, it's a way of communication. Now, that seems a little foreign to us, advanced primates. We're relying primarily on vision. But it should be, remember that mammals, the majority of them are nocturnal. All right, so most mammals, vision is not necessarily the major sense. If you're a rodent coming out at night, moving in a burrow, then smell is very important, and getting information from other members of your group is important. So these molecules are produced and they get information about an individual. So when dogs smell each other, excuse me, they can distinguish between males and females. The female, they can identify whether she is an estrus and receptive to mating or not. The male, they get a sense, is this the alpha male that wins all his fights? Is this the zeta male that loses all his fights? They get an idea of whether the individual is sick or not. They get an individual they get an idea of how closely related this individual is. And so that's an interesting aspect to these pheromones, that they actually they involve the MHC proteins. And so therefore, they vary based on your cellular fingerprint. Those MHC proteins that your cells use to distinguish between self and non-self. So here you see buffalo sniffing other buffalo. In fact, buffalo can take this one step further. They can either sample urine. So here this male buffalo is going to sample the urine made by the female. And that grimace is not a reflection on its perception of the taste, but rather the grimace is because, as we can cover in another chapter, the olfactory system actually has two ways of smelling, and a way to introduce odorants to one of them, called the vomeronasal organ, is to make this type of grimace, which opens up the tubes to that organ. So individuals which are then perceiving these pheromones are getting a lot of information about their the animals that they're sharing time with. And once again, for nocturnal animals, once again, that's very important. Now, this is a bit foreign to us because, once again, as I can cover in another chapter, if there are two olfactory systems in humans, and here's the main olfactory system that we're using to smell most things. And here then is the vomeronasal organ, whose primary goal is to smell pheromones. It doesn't work, all right? In ancestral catarrhine primates would be the old world monkeys, apes, and humans. In the ancestor of catarrhine primates, this broke, and it hasn't worked since. So while humans have two senses of smell, the anatomical structures form, one of them is broken and does not work. So, dogs meet each other and they're smelling each other and getting a lot of information. Humans, we don't greet each other that way. And if we tried, we would get far less information, simply because the pheromones are typically more perceived here, and this area is non-functional. That being said, humans do put pheromones in their sweat. All right, this changes with whether we're ill or not. This can change with hormone secretion. So if men make more testosterone, maybe after they win a contest of some sort, this could potentially change with the body odor that they have. Women's body odor changes during over the course of their menstrual cycle. It's well known that women who live together might find that their menstrual cycles come in sync. How is that possible? Well, they're aware, not consciously aware, but unconsciously aware of the pheromones produced by women that they spend a lot of time around, and then their own physiological cycles adjust to that. And we seem to have preferences for, given that these pheromones can be tied to the MHC proteins and cell ID badges, to pheromones produced by individuals who are different from us. So what is observed, and this can be in in mice or in humans, if you gave an option of odorants from an individual who was closely genetically related versus an individual who is less closely related, we tend to prefer those who are less closely related. So it seems that, here's kind of a way to have, a chemical attraction for those who are not closely related to us. And there is genetic advantages of that, in that this can limit the transmission of some genetically diseases which are recessive. And so here we have another type of mammalian gland, the apocrine sweat glands, which produce body odor. Then I'd like to close. Let me just shift. The last mammalian gland I'd like to review is the mammary gland. So here you see a mother cat nursing her kittens. She is making milk in mammary glands, and this is serving as the first source of nutrition for the infant mammal. Obviously, this is important. Perhaps just the most obvious is we call ourselves mammals. Mammals are named for mammary glands. So clearly this is an important part of mammal physiology, the first source of nutrition for infant mammals. Now, this apparently goes back to the earliest mammals, because if you were to look at the primitive mammals alive today, the egg-laying platypus and echidna, they have hair and they produce milk in mammary glands. And so clearly the very first mammals, even before live birth became a feature of the Therian mammals, that mammary glands were present. One difference is, however, in the egg-laying mammals, the mammary glands, they're just modified sweat glands, and the females will sweat milk that young have to lick off of tufts of hair. The mammary glands are not organized so that their ducts empty into a central nipple. So that was a feature of the live birth mammal. This is obviously an important type of gland. Now I'm going to kind of zip through a playlist that I have on mammary glands and milk. And the difficult thing is here, obviously in a topic on the integument, one is discussing glands. So this is appropriate. However, mammary glands are also obviously part of reproduction. So appropriate in discussions of reproduction as well. And so, how much detail to go into what, into which treatment of it one could debate. So I'd like to just quickly hit some highlights of mammary glands in general and human milk specifically. And once again, the playlist has more detail. First off, these are fairly complex glands. So if you look at the structure of these glands, there are these open spaces known as alveoli. So like a sac-like, grape-like structure is called an alveolus, and that they can be simple. But here, not only do you have multiple alveoli on this one stalk, but then the ducts branch. So this is called a compound alveolar gland. These develop in embryos in mammals in specific areas along what's known as a mammary ridge. So an embryo of mammals, all species, develop a mammary ridge stretching from the armpit down the chest and thorax to the thigh. So this mammary ridge here in yellow, these contain the cells which are capable of then forming mammary glands. But then species may narrow this down. So obviously cows produce mammary tissue only in the abdominal area. There are species where the mammary glands are more under the armpit. There are species which produce, multiple glands, mammary glands. For example, dogs along this ridge, and so where each species, here this cat is producing mammary glands in a different area than this bison. which is producing mammary glands in a different area than this primate. In different species, the number of offspring that females typically have varies, and so obviously the number of mammary glands can vary. Now, I'm going to zip over this, but one of the things about mammary glands, and very important, just not only in terms of physiology, but also if we wanted to discuss breast cancer, is that unlike many tissues, mammary glands are not done at birth. Right, the heart, for example, is. So cardiac muscle becomes cardiac muscle. It doesn't change, and after a certain point, the cells don't even divide anymore. Whereas there's development during the fetal stages, but then once an infant is born, mammary glands aren't done. Right, and when I say infant, obviously both men and women have mammary glands, while they are typically inactive in males. Farmers have noticed sometimes that there's, an atypical male that produces milk, and in humans, milk might be associated with an endocrine tumor in males, so that male mammary glands would actually make secretions, and that shouldn't be surprising, given that at birth, many infants, male and female, do have some degree of breast development and do release some sort of a secretion from their mammary glands, because during pregnancy, obviously, the infant was influenced by the hormones that were promoting breast development in the mother. Okay, and so mammary glands are potentially active in males, but it is the hormones of puberty which are produced in higher levels in females, estrogen, progesterone, and then later prolactin, which cause additional development. And so just, a point I'll make very quickly, these glands were not done at birth. So they're going to change in puberty. They're going to change during menstrual cycles, and then they're going to change during pregnancy. Sorry. And so the development continues. This is actually significant in discussions of cancer, such as breast cancer, because if one were to say, here's an effect of does something promote breast cancer? And the next question is, which type of breast tissue are we talking about? Because the mammary tissue is continually differentiating, and so in this individual who say has had children, the breast tissue is different from the individual who hasn't, and the effects of say a carcinogen might be different. One can clearly see the effects of hormones because, for example, in mice, if you take mice strains which have mutations, say for the estrogen receptor or the progesterone receptor or the prolactin receptor, their breasts may not continue to develop, and they might not have ducts forming, or the ducts might not branch. And so the development of mammary glands, which are modified sweat glands, but it's rather complex, and it continues then throughout life. They make then the secretions known as milk. Now, apocrine sweat glands make proteins and lipids, which are then secreted onto the surface of the body. So these mammary glands, they just do that, but to a much greater degree. They produce proteins, primarily caseins, lactalbumin, lactoferrin, but then others can be present as well. These have resulted from gene duplication, so there's even a series of casein genes in a row. Caseins can represent about a third of the protein in milk. Here you see mammary glands, which are active producing milk. This is a source of amino acids, very important because there are essential amino acids that the liver can't make, and they have to be included in a diet. And so therefore, this is then the source of the infant's amino acids. These can change. One of the interesting things about milk is it is not constant. Milk can vary from species to species. It can vary over the course of time, where the first milk produced after childbirth can be different from the milk which is produced later. Lactoferrin is uh, a lactalbumin is a protein in milk. And interestingly, lactalbumin is a modification of a gene which does something different. So once again, mammary glands evolved from um, from other glands. And so duplications of genes not related to milk production are involved in mammary gland formation and function. Lactoferrin can do a couple of things, including bind iron. And because it binds iron, it helps to promote a healthy microbial content in the infant's colon. So that's a little different from nutrition. There can also be antibodies in milk, specifically one called IgA. IgA is put into the secretions of the body. And so thus a mother can pass on immunity to her breastfeeding infant. So there are proteins in milk. There are also lipids in milk. Lipids are a very important energy source. I go into the diverse lipids in milk, but perhaps one of the most important things to consider in the lipids is the types of fatty acids. So to make, I have videos which will go into this in greater detail. But in addition to the omega-6 fatty acids, there are also then omega-3s, which are very important. Now, I'm sure you've heard of that distinction of omega-3 versus omega-6, and where this comes into play is if we ask where the first double bond is. So fatty acids can have double bonds. They can have and be unsaturated. They can have multiple double bonds and be polyunsaturated. And so then the question that arises, where are these double bonds? And we start off at the far end, not the end with the carboxylic acid, and we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if this sixth carbon is the first one to have a double bond, it is one is known as an omega-6 fatty acid. And so this linoleic acid, it's an essential fatty acid. It's used for a precursor to local hormones. That's very important. But then in milk, there are also omega-3 fatty acids, including essential fatty acids, which are needed for brain development. And so these fatty acids can then be incorporated into the cell membrane lipids and are very important in the cell membrane of the nervous system. So here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's a double bond. This would be an omega-6 fatty acid. Whereas here, 1, 2, 3, there's the double bond. This is an omega-3 fatty acid. These have to be included in the diet. Not only are there essential amino acids that the body can't make, there are essential fatty acids. And once again, these can be very important for the nervous system. And so breast milk is the source of these essential fatty acids for infants. One other thing is we use these fatty acids to make hormones. So there are different kinds of hormones. Some are derived from fatty acids, and some are pro-inflammatory and some are anti-inflammatory. And so in addition to the omega-6s, which can be converted into local hormones which are pro-inflammatory. The omega-3s can then be converted into local hormones, which are anti-inflammatory. And so thus the balance between the two is very, these local hormones came from omega-6s, there were other from the omega-3s. That's important in just health, keeping that in balance. There are also carbohydrates in milk. There are some monosaccharide sugars. Lactose, the disaccharide um, uh, uh, in milk, is a primary source of energy. And then interestingly, then there's more. There are more sugars in milk, but interestingly, infants typically can't digest them. And so if the milk then has these oligosaccharides with more than two sugar groups, what are they doing? And the answer is they're primarily to nourish a healthy set of microbes in the infant's large intestine. And so that will promote health. And so milk is not just feeding the infant, but promoting a healthy microbiome because there are microbes which one finds in a healthy infant's large intestine and others which are associated with being less healthy. And you can observe differences between infants which are breastfed versus bottle fed, the bacteria which one finds in the large intestine. And this can have consequences in infant health. So there are carbohydrates in milk. And wait, there's more. I just want to quickly do a quick overview. There are hormones in milk. Now, these hormones can be made, put in milk themselves. There's adipose around mammary tissue, and adipose is a source of hormones. There are white blood cells that are in the adipose tissue. There can even be white blood cells in milk itself. White blood cells can produce hormones. And so one of the things that is coming from milk towards the infant is signals. So the mother's body is signaling the body of the infant. Another thing that is in milk is what are called microRNAs. MicroRNAs are small RNA molecules which regulate gene expression. So the mother is passing along RNAs which will change the genes expressed in her infant. So a breastfed infant will be expressing to some degree different genes than a bottle-fed infant because of these microRNAs. And once again, this would be a different conversation. But we worry about this because microRNAs can affect gene expression, even important genes like genes which like the p53 gene, which controls cell division. And so that is a significant part of milk. There can be bacteria in milk which originate in the mother's skin. And so therefore, these can be the source of the microbiome. We have so many bacteria associated with our body, they actually outnumber human cells. So when you look in the mirror, there's actually more bacteria associated with your body than there are human cells. And as we're starting to appreciate this, microbiome has lots of effects on our health. And the microbiome present in milk can help to establish a healthy microbiome in infants. And so milk is made in mammary glands, so important that the mammals get their name from these mammary glands. And milk is quite a complex secretion. There are diverse proteins which do different things in addition to providing essential amino acids. There are lipids which provide energy, but also essential fatty acids and precursors to local hormones, which balance pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory states. There can be antibodies, there can be hormones, there can be microRNAs, there can be bacteria which help to establish a healthy microbiome. And so milk is obviously a very important um, and complex secretion for mammals. This has been a bit of an overview over on the glands which are associated with the integument of vertebrates.